who is developing this? Are they fully aware of the complex nature of who we are as human beings? Emotional intelligence is a phrase that's been bounced around a lot at the moment, but there was a box at the bottom that was called effective intelligence. And if you didn't have a tick and passed that section, even if you passed all of the others above, that was it.
So Abigail, lovely to have you here. Give us a little intro into who you are.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me here. It's lovely to be here today. So my background, I think of it as having a central spine that runs through it, and that spine is based on personal development of others, management, training, coaching. So it's very much people orientated as well. So if I go back to my spine that I have, I started with going to university, doing a degree in psychology. That then led me through a strange route to become an officer in the RAF. And while I was doing that, I was also training fighter control officers as well. I then moved into adult education and teaching when my children were young. And then I moved back into management with several global companies. And within those management roles, I was upskilling, training, coaching, and people management, of course. And then from that, it's led to where I am now, which I have my business, ATHENA Evolve, training, coaching, primarily developing managers, training delivery skills, and coaching programs. So yeah, it's that spine that I have. Yeah.
Well, it's a common theme of humans, yes. And given what you've done over your experience of lifetime, that the things I'm hearing are the RAF element. I'd love to hear more about that, and then, well, let's start there. Give me a deeper understanding of what that meant, because it sounds fascinating.
Well, firstly, it's a long time ago, but it stuck with me. And I believe that it gave me a good grounding for many traits and behaviours that have followed me through the rest of my life. So one of the key things is professionalism. It's the can-do attitude, anything is possible attitude. It's also I was totally inexperienced when I went in, and I didn't pretend otherwise, but it was my responsibility to be able to find a way to do it and to do it well. So I think there are certain key areas with me, certain traits that have stuck with me forever, and I suppose you could sum it up as a real can-do attitude. Linked to the training, so when I became a training officer, when I look back now, and hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it, to reflect, I realised that those skills of observing others, the way I communicate with others, the way I'm able to develop others, primarily through observing and questioning, that was in me. That was in me. I can even see it going back to my school days. So I've been lucky enough to sort of fall into these roles, but in hindsight, I recognise that those kind of skills were in me, and that awareness of others were in me from a very early age.
And who did you train at that point?
Fellow officers, so
okay.
ab initios in the role, through to combat ready status. But I had to train myself
so that
first.
must be deeply psychological as well.
Yes and no, but
okay.
When you're in the role and you're all invested in the role and you're working together, it's like any job. There is a purpose to it, there is a reason behind it, and I work with some exceptionally amazing people as well. So you support each other, you live together, you work together as well.
Well, I think this is a very valid and interesting point with regards to the world of AI, which again is a very broad spectrum, wide view, and it's something that, if we look at the current narrative in and around AI, it's very clearly being pushed with large language models, something I talk about a lot on the podcast. And it's a consideration that I've had recently, which is who is really working on this? What is their background, and what is their experience in life compared to a wider view of life? And across any industry, the common factor is the human factor. Now, the older professors that we know and that we've worked with have had very interesting lives, a lot of life experience, often have had kids, travelled around the world, talked to many people, taught students, developed careers, so their outlook is fundamentally very different. If you look at the type of people that have been developing AI in the very large companies, and in the sense that it's predominantly these large companies with a commercial agenda, it tends to be coming across as if here's a great future, it's going to make your life convenient, here are all the fantastic things it's going to do, this is what you need. But from a human perspective, do we believe they understand what we need?
Yeah, that is interesting, and that's often the starting point of this. So if we look at AI, I'm not an expert, but I've been learning about it. I think we all have a responsibility to do that. The AI is driven by models, rules, analysis, logic, whereas human emotions are incredibly complex. We're complex beasts. We have a huge number of internal emotional states that can be affected by past experiences, the way we filter information. So there's a bit of a mismatch between the two, and this goes back to what you were saying there, is who is developing this? Are they fully aware of the complex nature of who we are as human beings? So there needs to be a way to bring the two together. We're not going to replace AI. It's going to be an incredibly useful tool, but how can we use it responsibly, making sure that we still bring the human element into it?
Well, I think there's a couple of different directions here. One of which, it's becoming more and more apparent that subject matter expertise, so expertise and experience, has exponentially more value than has previously been understood. I mean, I used one of the ChatGPTs recently to ask a question, and it seems to have got a lot worse, because the belief is they seem to be advancing in certain areas, but the direction, again, with time, you can begin to forge a trajectory of where things are going, and what innovation is being implemented, and what the consideration of good looks like. Given contextually, China has released numerous models now. There's all sorts of tech coming out of that region, which is more powerful, more efficient, more accessible in many ways. But this particular query that I had, this prompt, it just did an internet search, and based on what I was looking at, it was just like Google used to be 10 years ago. Well, I already used to get results, and now it's just gone and found whatever information. Now I know that information is information that our team put together. So we've already answered the question. So that raises copyright theft, for one. So there's a legal issue. The information contained in there well, if we wrote it and it's spitting back to us what we already wrote, is it providing any knowledge? Because we know what the actual situation is, and it didn't describe any of the reality. If information becomes intelligence, and from the old military perspective, information isn't necessarily intelligence. Intelligence is assessed information. But if there's no subject matter expertise, is it intelligent, or is it just regurgitating and following a series of functions to present and almost trick you in a way?
And of course, biased as well,
if
it's based on that information. I suppose if we use the word that you've just used, intelligence, so you've got two very different types of intelligence here. So you've got the AI intelligence that is fact-based, information that's fed into it, and you've got the human side of intelligence that is going to become more and more important, and that's emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is a phrase that's been bounced around a lot at the moment. It's if it was easy to do, I think everybody would be fantastic at it. So, we've got one side where we need to become good at that emotional intelligence to counteract and understand where AI intelligence comes into it. So, you could ask the question, what is emotional intelligence? It's that self-awareness, so it goes back to the human side of it. Empathy, very much a human feeling again, and the ability to really read a room. So it has a huge impact on all sorts of things. So can AI truly motivate in a way that emotional intelligence does? Can AI truly resolve conflict resolution if that needs to be done? Or is it going to be something that will provide an initial, very useful tool to get things moving, to give some data, to give some background on behaviours, but then the sustainable bit to make change potentially is where that emotional intelligence, where the human approach needs to come in. So two different types of intelligence there.
There's an interesting point there, because you said the fact-based intelligence. There will be a huge shift in the direction of types of AI, because in reality, and I think it's very demonstrable and known, that word fact is a marketing term. The majority of information that these models have been trained on is in fact on the internet. And we've joked on this podcast before, everyone believes everything if it's on the internet. And it's the majority of information on the internet. In reality, for example, news generated content, user generated content is opinion. But it's representing opinion as fact. So there's a flaw there fundamentally. But then if you look at let's call that for this purpose IQ, then you've got the EQ. If the EQ is informed, responding to, and engaged with alleged fact-based intelligence, which is not, in fact, not fact at all, demonstrably so, then can't that have a crazy outcome that it's, in many ways, creating false pretenses, manipulating, and then the two begin to feed off each other. And given that 90% of corporate or enterprise data has never been anywhere near any of this, and won't be, people just won't be giving vast amounts of their confidential data, which is effectively the guardians of that data, like your clients, the managers, the companies, people who have to adopt AI with human beings and make that bridge between intellectual intelligence, whether it's AI driven or traditional data, and emotional intelligence, and bridge the gap between the two. So in reality, I think everything is far more murky, and we're being sold something which is not in fact, even in reality there. Capabilities and functions are inherently powerful, but the untapped potential of AI is, I think, the untapped potential of humans.
Yes, definitely. And I think there's quite a few people who are scared by AI. They're nervous about it. There's, as you say, the news, the Google talks about it replacing a lot of roles. I often sit back because of my job as well. I do a huge amount of observing, of really deep diving into things, of questioning, of looking at far more than the spoken word. And I do ask myself the question a lot of how well can AI replace certain human skills, which is what you were saying earlier. What areas could it really truly learn how to do this, or where is the gap? So as AI develops, I think it's managers, for example, a company's responsibility to be very realistic about the balance between where it might save costs, for example, or complete admin tasks, with the reality of how it can actually serve that purpose and what's missing from the human skills side of it.
I think there's a fundamental element, let's say innovation. So a fundamental premise which I think has been completely overlooked, and I think if we look at the type of people, and I don't like to stereotype, but the type of people that will be working on AI research tend not to be the type of people that you would perhaps be down the pub with and playing Sunday League football with, or perhaps running multinational companies. It's a scientific skill. There's an academic element to it, and you could label them in many ways, and in part I'm probably that myself too, so I can empathize and understand the idea. And if you look at the generational element to kind of put on top of that, that what we're all looking for is convenience, and we're all looking for an easy life, and that's what we all want. And by we all, a small subset, but applying that to everyone else, that's where I think a lot of the fear of it's going to replace all the jobs. But if I look at any valuable job and any innovation, real innovation, it tends to come through having the discipline to be prepared to try and fail 1,000 times. And it's actually that, I mean, the adage with Edison with the light bulb, he found 999 ways not to make a light bulb and one way to make a light bulb. You look at the work of Richard Feynman, there was a compelling need, and people worked together on the Manhattan Project, all different types of people to solve a problem. Of course, there were repercussions after that. There's potential good, there's potential bad. It could have saved millions and millions of lives, but it directly cost lives. What is good, what is bad? Free energy, potentially. Fantastic, but potentially there's a massive cost. I mean, when as a kid, saw the Greenpeace, the Rainbow Warrior, when it was sunk in the harbour in Auckland. And I remember that. And there's always multiple sides to a story. But the experience of going through things is where value is created. That's a human experience. Even in music, you want to reproduce, try again, lay down the instruments, and constantly iterate. So the idea that we replace all of that to come to a conclusion based on a handful of people saying what we all want is, I think the last time we really heard what we all want is, and everyone must conform, it was World War II. It's, again, huge amounts more complexity to it, but very narrow linear thinking is disregarding huge value. And the future, from what we can see from deep research, we're seeing the idea that AI could be personal to you. So you could learn more about yourself, you could train a version and create scale where you could deliver the value only you understand from only your experience to 1,000 other people simultaneously. Of course, the real deal is you, but your earning capability, the value you could deliver. Imagine we did that with leading sports stars, or if we could have bottled Einstein's experiences and brains, so he could teach millions of children around the world. And to have that human element, that's very powerful, that's very, very interesting. But all of these people would all say, you can't just wake up one morning and become an Olympic athlete. It's the dedication, it's the repetitiveness, it's trying, it's the new experiences. What's your take on that?
So listening to what you're saying, there are three things, the key things that I would take from that. Now, the first one was convenience. And yes, there is an element of, we all like to have a bit of convenience. It's time saving. The world of work is crazy for some people. So there are pros with that. The second one, which I completely agree with, is linked to the experience side of it, the experiential side of making mistakes. And if we all reflect back in life, I know I certainly can, some of my biggest learning curves, one of the reasons I do what I do today is because I have learnt so much through the things that I would have done differently. All sorts of areas. And I expect to continue to do so. So that's the experiential side of it. That's where you take your mind to a deeper level and think about things. So I'm in absolute agreement with that. If everything's given us too easily and on a plate, and you then start to expect certain things that you can do it correctly, but when another problem comes along, because you haven't thought creatively around that in the past, those are all in there still, all those thoughts are still in there, and it may be that you struggle with another solution. That's two. The third one is talking about how you could be as part of an AI program where you're learning, and it's replicating the way that you behave and learn. Potentially you're doing that alone. Potentially you're not in a room with other people. So we've got a few examples post-lockdown where people are starting to try and get back into work. There is a reason for that, and it goes back to evolutionary psychology. So evolutionary psychology, and if you think of things like, I think this is probably the key one, affinity bias or similarity bias. We've all got bias within those, and that's a subconscious need to do something. So affinity bias is quite a deep driven need to find similarity in others, to be with others, to form that connection with others. In Maslow's hierarchy and his model, you've actually got food and shelter right at the bottom, and above that you've got the need to be loved and form connections. So that's one example of it. So the evolutionary psychology element of it comes from probably when we were living in caves, where we wanted to be with like-minded people for survival, for reproduction. Now my question linked to just being with an AI model, when you're one-to-one, as it were, does that remove that fundamental need within us to actually be with people, with like-minded people, and be together with people? Because that's something that, again, it's another human element side to us. It's part of who we are, part of a fundamental drive that's within us and often subconscious.
Well, I think that is very important. I mean, last Sunday was one of the most important days in the last 70 years when Newcastle won.
Oh yes, congratulations.
Exactly. It was brilliant, but that moment, that experience that everyone in the stadium and everyone watching, and the fact it was a Dan Burn, local Geordie lad, scoring, and then the whole magical story. but all of those players, all as a team, that was just pure raw emotion. That's not something that I think can be replicated by AI. However, when you do look at how sport as an industry, which is a human industry, you know, professional football players, for example, their scouting networks are, I know Chelsea have data scientists, and they have an entire department now. They're signing young players based on scouting via AI. So again, it's the scale, but what makes a person a winner in a team sport is the ability to have that camaraderie. It's almost like the military, with people being in a unit together. It's the brotherhood that they may have, or the sisterhood. It's that something where over a period of time you begin to instinctively understand each other, and you have a common goal, and that common goal outweighs all of the differences. So I think when people really begin to understand those elements, they're going to look at AI very differently, and they're going to look at what the ability to do things on scale, to the ability to do things which could have been not possible due to the quantity or the access to information or the capabilities. Then I think people are going to look at what problems are worth solving, and the problems that we're being told to solve are not them. I mean, I always remember many years ago, I was quite young and had been doing some stuff as in the think tank capacity for Steve Jobs, and the problem we were set, it was me, and I had a small team of people. Apple sold software, but if you went into the average store, people didn't think they sold it. I mean, I would even go into PC World and say, do you have any Apple software? No, we don't. And they're probably going to go bankrupt anyway. But if you walked around the store, you saw they did. And they would have often individual or dual branded, so that if it was for Mac and for PC, but some just Mac. But people weren't really aware. Steve had just come back to Apple. It was a very peculiar time. They were totally on the rocks. It was all being re-innovated. And part of the ethos was, instead of giving people something and for them to say, right, this is a capability, how do we make this work for our business or our life? He looked at it and said, how can people enjoy their life and complement how they work and create something which enhances their existing dreams and ambitions, which also infuses beauty into it, as opposed to trying to make a square fit into a round hole. So there was another problem, which was software piracy at that time. This is late 90s. So the solution we came up with was a singular case, which was a beautiful box, completely different type of manufacturing, which was cheaper than what it would have otherwise been, other than one component, and just one single printed bit. So it depended on what type of software, but you could see these boxes and they were beautiful, kind of multi-layered, transparent plastic, but they were little pieces of art. And that meant if everyone had them, then everywhere you would see it, that's you have Apple software, or Apple compatible software. The other element was a microchip in the box. So the box, which looked and felt more valuable, became the holder of the license. So on a corporate basis, enterprise sales, if a reseller is selling 30 licenses to Photoshop, it would have been back then they would put 30 licenses on the box. And when you get the box, the box gives the computer the licenses, and they can give the licenses back to the box and then onto another computer. So it solved the security. So you always kept the box. The box was your key.
Okay.
So you couldn't just rip it off. So people could just take the code before, take a license key. But if you could never see the license key was this beautiful possession. And it was portable, transferable. So he spent, I think, $97,000 the day he received the CAD drawings and all the designs. And I was never allowed to speak about it again. But and I think it ended up, unfortunately, politically, to enforce everyone to do that was a whole different issue. But it demonstrated it could be solved by understanding how did people behave, how did they operate, and don't get them to change fundamentally. Or stop selling them things that, oh, this is great, that's great, that's great. Yeah, but now I have to change my entire business to fit your software. It's craziness. That's the world we're in now.
It is, yeah. I think there is still an element that, that's the bright and shiny stuff that you're talking about. And in that case, it didn't work until the problem was solved. But there is still an element of, as humans, we're quite fickle. We are attracted to the bright and shiny, the new. The social media different forms of social media are an example of that. And sometimes, again, we could take this back to experiences. We may make some big mistakes in being attracted to the shiny and the new, or led by others to do it, and it then may come around full circle. But that's quite a big step with AI, to be attracted to the wonderful and new, to then find out that it's missing the key component of human complexities.
Yeah, and often my lessons that I learned from the various things that I've done is even if you create something which is super cool and super great, people want to live the life that they live. They don't want a huge amount of extra work, and they want an outcome. Yes. And if you can understand, it sounds obvious, if you can understand your customer, if within an organization one department deals with 30 people, let's call them their customers. If they can understand the motivating factors, there was the CEO of a huge beer company, I won't name which one, but very, very smart man, said, make everyone a hero. Everyone should have a personal win. So within anything, any technology which is adopted, any situation whatsoever, you create a win-win situation that you can listen, hear, understand the motivating factors on all sides. If you can deliver something which doesn't necessarily completely change behavior, for example, right, you work as that and tomorrow you're going to work as something else. Well, you don't want to. Now you've always used one way of working, you don't do that anymore, you do it completely differently. Abrupt changes are a shock to the system. So how can you evolve, but how can you really listen and say, well, out of all the things that you do, if there are 100 steps to achieving an objective, if there's value in 30, some are just monotonous tasks which are repetitive, could we help you get to your destination quicker without compromising X, Y, and Z, but making others more efficient? But also a lot of it's communication. Can you create engagement and a flow of information? Because if you make any decision based upon information available to you, the majority of the time, well, you could say in life, you could say in large corporates, you could say in management, even personal relationships, communication is often one of the greatest causes of mistakes, bad things, outcomes which are not desired. So I'm rambling a bit now, but there are so many elements of complexity which are very human-centric, but that technology can be incredible for, but not a black and white, this is it, or not at all.
But again, that goes back to what we mentioned earlier, is about using any form of technology responsibly. Yeah. So I would embrace data reports, the foundations to find out about somebody in more depth. I would embrace the time-saving element of it. I would embrace the potential to identify key steps in someone's training and development, for example. I would embrace it if it gave me the opportunity to push it out to a huge number of people. The however bit is that you then need to work out what to do next with it. It's sometimes a short-term solution that you then need, as you say, the human element side of it, the human communication side of it, to take it that one step further. And I think that's often where people struggle. It's knowing the what to do next to make it sustainable quite often. And I agree with you, it's the communication side of it. That's enormously important. And communication, words are a tiny part of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's body language.
Yeah.
There's as you said, reading the room. Yeah. I've mentioned examples on here before. If you've been up to no good and you've caused a load of trouble, then you turn up late. Yeah. What do you expect the room to be read like? Yeah. Whereas if you've been good, you're on time, you're taking care of things, well, you can expect a different reaction. But I think a key thing, which you had mentioned at the beginning, which is an overriding factor of all of the conversations, the thoughts, the innovation, and alleviating the fears, understanding fears, is why. Yeah. Why everything? The inquisitive mind. Because if you can understand why are we being sold this dream rather than that dream? When you look at it, you can see why. Why are we going down this direction? Why is this a strength, or large language models? Why is there a strength and to a benefit? It's an incredible capability to summarize information and to leverage vast amounts of knowledge. Why is it a risk? Because is that knowledge based on a load of rubbish? And is it because you're trying to achieve summarizing something, or the capability for its powerful use? Yeah. Or are you trying to just make it fit because there's another narrative? Yeah. Why trust information? Why would you not trust information? Why is something good? Why is it not good? Again, it goes back to the context of why is something interesting to me but maybe not to you, and to somebody else but not to somebody else? Yeah. What is the motivating factor behind everything? And it is the common denominator is we are, by our very existence, people that see the view of the world through a singular set of eyes.
We do, yeah.
And they're all different.
Yeah, yeah. And that's where my role comes in as well, is I have to have a very deep ability to really see the reasoning behind somebody's comments, behaviours. So if we go back to communication, so sensory acuity is where you look beyond what you're hearing, the word side of it. So when I'm talking to somebody, I'm observing you now, I'm listening, but I'm also observing you. So I'll use you as an example. If you were sitting in front of me, let's go back to AI first. If you were using an AI model, and the AI model said, let's think of an example, presentation skills, and said to you, how do you feel about your presentation skills? And you said, yeah, feeling really confident about that. Okay, the AI says, that's great. So we'll move on to the next step here. If I was sitting in front of you, I would be observing the fidgeting. I might be observing a different tone in your voice. You might be suddenly speaking really quickly because you're nervous. It might be that your posture changes and you slump back. It might be that your eye movements change. There's lots of little subtle clues that immediately, for me, because I can understand humans and I have an awareness of how emotions, past experiences, etc. affect it, I would be questioning that response and saying, is this real or not? That's a big question. What is going on internally in this person's head linked to their emotions. So that is the deeper level of questioning, and then through questions, through trying to allow that person to look into previous experiences, through how they're feeling about things, you could actually delve into the real answer behind that. And the chances are, in this example, it could be that you fidgeting actually feel incredibly underconfident, that you're putting this show on because you think that's what you should be telling other people. So it's one example, and I ask myself, again, I always ask myself questions as well as other people. I ask the question, can that be truly replaced by AI? AI may be developed to read a smile, a furrowed brow, but can it really read everything that we can perceive as human beings?
Well, I think an interesting aspect of that, which is an underlying element that people don't think of so much, actually people do it all the time, assuming. So what you've just described there, you could get cameras, you could set it up, you could leverage technology and use your iPhone cameras. Of course, you'd have to have it positioned correctly. You could do all of that, but the application of that across the world, why would people go to the length to actually ensure and validate, right, it is set up, we've done testing on this individual, it's all set up everywhere? They won't. You can't even get people to do the basic things in reality, right? We all know that. There are so many shortcuts. People can't even be bothered to put stuff into bins when there's a bin right there, or cross the road at a crossing, or cross 10 foot before. People are always doing that. So the measurement of information at its root kind of core is usually compromised. It's actually the big problem. I mean, we see it with the NHS, we see it with all the major organizations we worked with across the world. There's all these departments, they're creating all this data, and it could be from corporate security cameras, it could be from revenue figures, it could be all sorts of things. And probably none of it is perfect. Actually, proportionally, if you look at the amount that probably is perfect, depending on the particular department, it varies and ranges. But we've got a lot of data that, on the face of it, is not even recording a lot of what we assume it does. So to make all these assumptions, oh, that works that way, we can use that and we can come to these conclusions, probably doesn't have the majority of either any sort of equality or even the initial recording of information, which is assumed that is going to be there in the end anyway. There's a whole world of underlying problems that people assume just works.
Assumptions.
They're
dangerous.
An almost exponential level of assumptions, but when you really delve deep into the world, nothing works like you think it does, or more to the point, how it's sold to you.
Yes. By whom? Sold to you by whom?
And why?
Yes.
Well, usually because they're trying to make money or look good. And it can be human reasons, it could be commercial reasons, it could be any number of reasons, but there's always a why, and there's always this chain that goes through. But if you can instinctively pick up based on experience, and you will know from everything that you've done in your life and the people that you deal with, nothing is as simple as it seems.
Never.
No.
Never. Ethics comes into what you were just saying as well.
Give me your view on that, because I think that is an extremely important factor. But I bet you most people couldn't tell you what ethics meant.
How would I describe ethics in a sentence? I'd probably use the word responsibly. Again, I've used that a few times today, but it's using the information responsibly. And responsibly is about considering, it might be social, cultural awareness. it might be linked to not formulating a picture of somebody by a couple of responses or questions. I mean, that can lead to a lot of problems. If we use management, it could be biases in performance reviews or the hiring process as well.
And what are the implications of that? Just to give some context.
The implication is potential bias.
But I mean, the implications of bias in the working environment where someone's been mislabeled.
It could link to career opportunities. It could link to not keeping somebody motivated and retain them. That's very costly for a business. It could be linked to whole team motivation as well, because there's not, individuals might be pulled out for the wrong reasons. So, I mean, you could have somebody, as an example, who has a young baby. So their behaviour is slightly affected by that, but they're branded in a certain way because of their responses that are identified through AI. Is that ethical? Is that right to do? But it also can lead people into different patterns of responses as well. So it's, again, what you have to do is bring back the human touch around this and use common sense rather than allowing AI to dictate as well.
Well, common sense is something that I think should be infused, but again, if we go back to what we talked about originally, whose life experience and whose view is implementing what common sense looks like? Yeah. Because if it's a less experienced human, then they can define common sense looks like that. Yeah. I mean, you can look at any particular country. Yeah. If we looked at the biases from OpenAI in comparison to DeepSeek, on a pure human level, what do you think the differences would be? But on a political level, what do you think the differences would be? Given DeepSeek, China, OpenAI, US.
Completely different, opposite ends of the spectrum.
But from a human level?
From a human level, you have to bring in the emotional side of it. You have to be able to understand these things. It's completely different.
So then there would be a cultural infusion.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Common sense, though. Common sense to one person is different to another, isn't it? So I suppose that's a sweeping statement, a sweeping phrase that you can use. So it just reminded me when we spoke about that of actually something that we were assessed on when I went through my officer training in the RAF. Right. And this has always stuck with me. So there was a box when you were, say you're out in the field doing an exercise, and there was a box that they would tick or put comments on, get different elements of potentially leadership, communication styles, equipment used, team collaboration, all of that. But there was a box at the bottom that was called effective intelligence. And if you didn't have a tick and passed that section, even if you passed all of the others above, that was it. And effective intelligence is fundamentally common sense. It's how you apply everything above into the real scenario. So you pull it all together, and if something happens that you're not expecting it, that's where you use your effective intelligence, aka common sense. And that has always stuck with me, and there's an element of that we could pull into how AI is developed and used as well.
I think that's very valuable, because if you consider you create a product, because this is technology, so you create a product with a purpose, and you think, right, that's what it's going to be used for. Therefore, validation and metrics tend to be associated with the intended outcome. But what happens when something else happens which affects it? I mean, in simple football talk, one of your main players gets injured in the 13th minute. Well, your entire strategy included that player, but suddenly that player is not available, and that's a connecting component gone. Then what? I mean, everything could just fall apart. And even if you look at the particular use, there are so many things. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry is predominantly, one famous surgeon said to me, there's only really like a handful of types of drugs in the world. But they find so many different reasons to use them. So it's really matching 4 or 5 fundamental drugs to anything that they can have a reason why to sell. So it comes back to, well, in order to sell, you've got to have a condition. In order to sell a drug for a condition, then you need to get the ability to sell for that condition, but then that condition effectively has to in many ways be sold. I think that's the more modern evolution of selling pharmaceuticals in a way, as opposed to the core science of healthcare. Which, again, there's medical discoveries and all sorts else, but the idea of, well, drugs for antidepressant are used for migraine prevention, and there are drugs for blood pressure which can be used for other things too. That it's discovering all these alternative uses, but if you have only measured based on one outcome and you've created something for a particular reason, I mean, AI with large language models has a lot more capability. There are other types of AI than large language models. There's vision, there's all the others. But there's always going to be, especially in conflict times, you come up with the idea of this little drone which can fly around and take pictures of, film you and your kids playing on a beach, and it can track the ball. Well, put that into a military context, chuck on a release mechanism, and that's what you had in and around Mosul when ISIS had the caliphate. There are numerous edge cases, other use cases, and weaponization of ideas, because a different human's got a different idea with a different cause, a different why.
So that's context, isn't it?
The context,
examples of context
completely changes.
Just going back to your Newcastle or football team analogy, where it's you said that they would, if they lost a player that was a key player, they would lose it. So is that, are you referring to the fact that, and the drugs as well, that if you have a more limited number of possible applications, it's about, this is my understanding of what you just said, that you focus on those and make them right and be able to expand them into other areas rather than trying to have hundreds and they become too specialised. Is that what you meant by that?
Well, I think there's generalised AI where it can have a generic, huge, wide range of possible capabilities, a lot of which are not particularly performant and are extremely ethically erroneous, because effectively it's aspiring to average. Based upon a kind of race to domination in a particular market, with a lot of shortcuts taken. So it exposes a lot of negative outcomes. So if you go too wide and too generalised, you end up in a position you don't have control, and you also ensure a lot of very average and bad outcomes. Now, if that's missold on the basis that, well, you can trust this, and I mean, it's like getting your car serviced by a drunk who turns up at lunchtime, realises he's got to give the car back at 2, but you trust the brand. But if you've had a half-cocked job done on your car, and he was working on the brakes, or supposed to, and tyres, which you knew were compromised, but none of that was really done properly, and then you're behind the wheel of a car on the motorway that you know it's a bit of a rough job because it wasn't really considered, it wasn't validated, it wasn't checked, because it's, in the AI context, it's too wide and the race is to get the car out the door, not to do a good job. So if you focus on what are the actual problems that are worth solving, I mean, the reality is, history has shown us the Industrial Revolution was about the machinery that allowed everything to happen. The majority of revolutionary changes has been when business has adopted technology for efficiency, not retail. But the race for the retail to then, with the idea of picking up enterprise, have taken so many shortcuts, it would be extremely dangerous to adopt into enterprise. Therefore, the people that put all the money into the big ones to begin with will never get their return on investment. It's the revolution will begin elsewhere, and at the moment it's prevented. I mean, that GAEA AI, we're focused on the enterprise trust and truth basis, and working with people on the basis that there's a very clear demonstrable problem. We're solving that problem. We're explainable all the way through. It makes sense. We're listening. We're engaging to the individual stakeholders. There's 1,000 other things we could do, but we're focused on what the needs are, and safety all the way along. So the future, this big fear of AI, it's not where everyone thinks it is, and it can't go where everyone thinks it's supposed to go, because this is equivalent of cheap fast food, and we're being told it's Gordon Ramsay 5-star Michelin.
Definitely.
It's not.
Definitely. So that you mentioned there several times the word trust, and I think that's what's got to come into this is pulling that together. It's starting small. So you've got these ideas, but there's certain things that aren't allowed just yet. It's starting small. It's getting it right. It's putting it out there, allowing people to trust it, understand how to use it with a clear outcome in sight, and then moving on with the development. The reality is, what you just said, that there is a race to push it out there. So there's a little bit of a dichotomy here.
It becomes with the fear. I mean, anytime we look, I always look at it and say, well, look back at history, even with microchips. They were huge, slow, took a huge amount of power. And they got smaller and more efficient. Mobile phones, the same. Everything, all evidence shows us everything will go smaller, cheaper, more efficient. The narrative has been, and is now, I think, getting caught out, we need bigger, more expensive. Contrary to all evidence of technology in human history. So when DeepSeek came out and said we've been able to do it at a fraction of the price, we're already aware of numerous others that can do it even cheaper and far more efficient. There is one direction. So the announcement of the 500 billion and the alleged 15 billion here of AI investment, which was all really going to be for infrastructure based around a small number of companies, was on the idea that the trajectory it would cost more and more, and we need more power and we need more of that. Undoubtedly there is a metric which shows there will be more information created, there will be a need for more power, but not to the astronomical extent, because you're fighting this curve of it going the other way. More efficiency, more scalability, less power requirements, higher performance, because that's what all of technology has shown us. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist, I don't think, to really look at it and say everything we really need to look for in the future, there are clear signposts and demonstrable evidence of where this is going. And when when common sense doesn't match up with the story we're being sold.
Effective intelligence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then, you know, it affects, you know, what's your investment strategy for the future? I mean, we touched on that with Ed, who was on the show. Yeah. It's there for everyone to see. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, everything in the press is based predominantly in the financial press, also in press releases and curated figures, published figures and stories and projections and ideas and elements of selling. But at what point do people stop seeing, or have they stopped seeing information for being what it is?
So the big question is, how is that going to be managed? How can it be done when you have these huge leading businesses driving this, but you also have people recognizing the human element of it, or the key need for it? How, it's a big question, I'm not expecting you to answer it, but how is this going to be managed?
Well, I think there's more and more capabilities in it are going to come to market.
Okay.
The reality of democratized AI, and democratized isn't some communist sounding thing. Okay. It's democratized in the sense it's no longer the exclusive remit of 4 companies. Okay. So you could have your own model, you could train your own model, you could have it solve your problems. You can protect your own data. Democratized in the sense that when you've got that, you don't need to go through someone's external cloud. You could have the capabilities. A company could have their own AI, several forms of it, in their own infrastructure, which never goes outside, safe, protected, and they leverage the capability to their needs. Democratized is enabling individuals and groups in the form of companies, organizations, to leverage the capability to solve the problems that matter to them. And at which point, by popular demand, and as soon as this sort of stuff is available, the idea of the race to the bottom is, if everyone can have it, and they can have it and control it themselves, well, that's market economics. So I think it will self-regulate in the sense. Obviously the big companies will go for the strategy of buying the smaller companies who are moving forward. They have to now, in a way, and we're already seeing that. I think there was a deal for 35 million buying a company. Google bought a company yesterday. Life will find a way, but when we're not
does.
Exactly, we're not quite in. We're not in the movie being played on TV right now. Yeah. So as with all series, it'll come to an end and there'll be a new series on.
Yes, absolutely.
So
it's just AI is moving fast, isn't it?
It's all moving fast.
It is.
But at the core of it, humans.
Yes, absolutely. And I believe that as AI develops, this is where leaders and management, the interpersonal skills that they possess will become more and more important.
I think as a final point, on top of that, the leaders of the future will need to and become the leaders of the future because they can communicate and because they understand people. Something we haven't had for a while. But as with everything, it'll go from one extreme to the other, to the other, to the other, and we're in a shift. Yeah,
very values-driven leaders. Exactly. I think it is slowly moving towards that now. But
it is.
Yeah.
And communication.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, it was a pleasure having you here.
Lovely to be here, and thank you very much. I've learnt a lot today from you.
Excellent. I appreciate it. Lovely.